Have you ever found yourself hesitating before doing something you once loved? Not because of sharp pain or dramatic weakness, but because of something far more subtle. A whisper of uncertainty that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Maybe it's that moment when you're standing in your garden looking at the weeds that need pulling, and your body has this quiet conversation with itself. Are you sure about this? Or perhaps it's reaching for something on the top shelf and feeling that slight tightening in your chest. Not fear exactly, but a negotiation. A pause where there used to be fluid motion. Your body begins to speak in a different language after 60. The stiffness in your joints, the hesitation in your step, these aren't signs of failure. They're whispers. Gentle signals from a body that's simply asking, can we talk about this first? Most of us have been taught to ignore these whispers or fight them. But what if I told you there was a third option? What if instead of fighting or surrendering, you could learn to listen and respond with profound nourishment? I'm Dr. Anya Sharma, and I call myself a somatic gerontologist. That's a fancy way of saying I study how our bodies experience aging, not just what happens to them. And I'm here to tell you something that might surprise you. Your body isn't breaking down. It's sending you signals. Let me share why this matters so deeply to me. My father was a carpenter. Not just any carpenter, he was an artist with wood. He could feel the grain through his fingertips, sense exactly where a piece wanted to split or hold strong. For 40 years, his hands moved with the confidence of someone who spoke the language of timber. But as he aged, something shifted. He didn't lose his strength overnight. He first lost his feel. The subtle communication between his hands and the wood began to fade. He'd run his palm along a board and frown unsure. The hesitation crept in before the weakness ever did. I watched this master craftsman become tentative in his own workshop. The medical world could measure his grip strength, his bone density, his muscle mass, but they couldn't measure what he'd really lost: his flow. That seamless dance between intention and action. That's when I realized something profound. Vitality isn't about fighting age. It's about deeply nourishing our biology so we can continue to feel our way through life with confidence. Today, we're not going to talk about fixing muscle loss or beating aging. We're going to learn how to nourish the very soil from which your strength grows. Because here's what I've discovered in my 20 years of research: your body doesn't fail with age. It simply starts communicating in a different language. My work isn't to make you young again. It's to teach you how to become fluent in this new language, so those whispers don't become shouts. And it starts with understanding that your body's a garden. For decades, we've been told the recipe for muscle is beautifully simple: eat more protein, lift more weights. End of story. But if you're over 60, you've probably noticed something. This advice feels incomplete, like you're missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Here's why you can't build a sturdy house on crumbling, inflamed ground. The hidden culprit isn't a lack of protein. It's the chronic low-grade inflammation and oxidative stress that act like silent weeds, quietly choking the life out of your muscle tissue. They create an environment where even the best intentions, the perfect protein smoothie, the dedicated exercise routine, struggle to take root. Think about it this way. Imagine trying to plant a beautiful garden in soil that's been poisoned by chemicals, compacted by neglect, and overrun by persistent weeds. You could have the most expensive seeds, the best fertilizer, the most dedicated watering schedule, but until you address the soil itself, nothing will truly flourish. That's what's happening in your body right now. The inflammation creates a hostile environment. Your muscles want to grow, want to respond to your efforts, but they're fighting an uphill battle against an ecosystem that's working against them. So before we talk about building, we need to talk about healing. Before we plant, we need to prepare the soil. And that's where Arthur's story begins. Arthur Henderson had been a librarian for 37 years. Quiet, thoughtful, with hands that moved gently through the world. When he retired, he poured all that careful attention into his garden. For 5 years, that garden was his sanctuary. Every morning, he'd step outside with his coffee and survey his small kingdom. The roses climbing the trellis, the herb spiral he'd built with his own hands, the patch of tomatoes that seemed to grow just for the joy of it. But recently, something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. Arthur wasn't in pain. He wasn't weak. It was subtler than that and somehow more troubling. He'd find himself standing at the edge of his garden, coffee cooling in his hands, negotiating with his body. The weeds needed pulling. But kneeling felt like a decision that required planning. The higher shelves in his potting shed seemed to have moved up a few inches when he wasn't looking. His garden, once a place of pure freedom, began to have invisible fences. Areas he'd unconsciously decided were difficult. Tasks that required too much bending, too much reaching, too much confidence in his body's reliability. The worst part wasn't the physical hesitation. It was the emotional weight of it. Arthur had always found peace in the feeling of rich soil under his fingernails, in the simple pleasure of his body moving with purpose and flow. Now that feeling was being replaced by calculation. Can I get back up easily? Will this hurt tomorrow? Is this worth the risk? He wasn't losing his strength exactly. He was losing his trust. The seamless conversation between his intentions and his body was becoming stilted, careful, guarded. Arthur's garden was still beautiful, but he was starting to feel like a visitor in his own sanctuary, rather than its confident caretaker. When Arthur came to me, I didn't hand him a workout plan or a protein powder. I didn't even give him a list of 5 fruits to memorize. Instead, I proposed something that felt almost too simple, a conversation starter. A 2-week experiment that would help his body remember how to whisper instead of worry. Arthur, I said, I want you to think of your body as a garden that's been through a difficult season. Before we plant anything new, we need to prepare the soil. We need to create an environment where strength can grow naturally. I asked him to introduce just 2 things into his daily routine. Not dramatic changes, not overwhelming protocols, just 2 gentle soil conditioners that would help his body remember what it felt like to be nourished at the cellular level. The first was half an avocado every morning. Think of this as rich healing compost, I explained. The monounsaturated fats and vitamin E aren't just nutrients, they're like adding organic matter to depleted soil. They reduce the inflammation that's been making your muscles feel uncertain. The second was a small glass of tart cherry juice before bed. This is your gentle night rain, I told him. The anthocyanins will help quiet the inflammatory chatter that's been keeping your recovery from being complete. The natural melatonin will help you sleep more deeply, and sleep is when your body does its most profound healing work. Arthur looked skeptical. That's it, just fruit. Not just fruit, I said. Think of it as your body's way of remembering what it's like to be truly nourished. I want you to pay attention not just to your strength, but to your feel. Does your body seem to move with more confidence? Does the world feel less negotiable and more approachable? Arthur agreed to try it, not because he believed it would work, but because it felt gentle enough to be safe. He had no idea he was about to rediscover the language of his own vitality. 2 weeks later, Arthur called me with something in his voice I hadn't heard before: curiosity. Dr. Sharma, he said, I'm not stronger exactly, but I feel smoother. Is that possible? I smiled. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Arthur, tell me more about smoother. Well, my mornings used to feel like my body was a car that needed to warm up before it could really run. The first few steps were always tentative. But this week I've been waking up and just moving, like my body remembered how to be a body again. This is where the deeper understanding begins. This is where everything clicks into place. But Arthur, I said your body is a garden, and what you're experiencing is the first sign that the soil is beginning to heal. Let me explain what was happening in Arthur's body, because it's probably happening in yours too. For years, chronic inflammation had been like persistent weeds throughout his system. These weren't the dramatic acute inflammation of an injury. This was the quiet, constant kind that comes from decades of stress, processed foods, and simply living in a world that doesn't always nourish us the way we need. This inflammation was like weeds that had grown so quietly, so persistently, that they'd become part of the landscape. They were stealing nutrients from his muscle tissue, creating a constant state of cellular stress, making his body feel like it was always fighting an invisible battle. The avocado was like adding rich organic compost to depleted soil. The monounsaturated fats weren't just healthy fats. They were actively cooling the inflammatory fires that had been burning low and steady for years. The vitamin E was acting like a gentle rain on parched earth, helping his cells remember what it felt like to be truly nourished. The tart cherry juice was even more magical. Those deep purple anthocyanins were like beneficial microorganisms working through the night to restore the natural balance of his system. And the melatonin wasn't just helping him sleep, it was giving his body the deep restorative rest it needed to actually heal, rather than just to survive. We haven't planted anything yet, I explained to Arthur. We've just made the garden hospitable to life again. Your body is remembering what it feels like to be truly nourished at the cellular level. The smoothness you're feeling, that's your inflammation levels dropping. That's your body exhaling a breath it's been holding for years. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, so what happens next? Now I said we create a complete ecosystem. Over the next month, Arthur and I expanded his garden. Not all at once, that would be like trying to build a complex ecosystem overnight. Instead, we added one element at a time, letting his body adjust and respond before moving to the next. The soil is healing, I told Arthur during our third week, but now we need to make sure every corner of your garden gets the water and nutrients it needs. I introduced him to pomegranate, not the whole fruit which can be cumbersome, but a small glass of pure pomegranate juice. With his lunch, think of this as installing a sophisticated drip irrigation system throughout your garden, I explained to him. Pomegranate enhances your body's production of nitric oxide, which sounds technical, but it's actually beautifully simple. It's like ensuring that every single muscle fiber, every cell gets the oxygen and nutrients it needs to thrive. Within days, Arthur noticed something remarkable. I feel like I have more presence, he told me. Like I'm more here in my body, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. His circulation was improving, his muscles were getting better nourishment, and his entire system was beginning to work more efficiently. The hesitation in his movements was starting to dissolve, replaced by a quiet confidence he'd almost forgotten he possessed. By the fourth week, Arthur's garden was ready for growth. The soil was healthy, the irrigation was working, and now it was time to signal his body that it was safe to build. I know what you're thinking, I said as I suggested he add 5 prunes to his morning routine. But hear me out. These aren't just for digestive health, though they'll help with that too. Think of prunes as slow-release organic fertilizer. Prunes contain boron, a trace mineral that's like a master key for bone health and muscle function. But more importantly, they contain compounds that gently stimulate IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, which is your body's natural signal that it's time to build and repair. This isn't about forcing growth, I explained. It's about creating an environment where your body feels safe. To invest in building muscle again, like adding fertilizer that doesn't just feed the plants, but encourages them to grow stronger roots and reach toward the sun. Arthur embraced this phase with growing enthusiasm. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about nutrition. It was about creating a conversation with his body based on nourishment rather than fear. By the 6th week, Arthur's transformation was becoming undeniable, not just to me, but to him. His garden was thriving, but now we needed to protect it. Every healthy garden needs beneficial allies, I told him, handing him a crisp apple. But here's the key, don't peel it. The skin contains something called ursolic acid. Arthur bit into the apple and I continued. Think of ursolic acid as introducing beneficial ladybugs into your garden. They actively fight off the pests that want to eat your plants. In your body, these pests are proteins, like myostatin, that actually signal your muscles to stop growing. The apple skin creates a protective environment where growth can flourish without being constantly sabotaged. This was when Arthur's understanding deepened into something approaching wonder. So it's not just about adding good things, he said. It's about creating a complete system where everything works together. Exactly, I said. Your body isn't a machine that you fuel. It's an ecosystem that you cultivate. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a collection of small moments, each one building on the last. Arthur started noticing that his morning walks felt less like exercise and more like walking. His hands were steadier when he drank his coffee. The stairs in his house seemed to have lost their intimidating quality. But the real moment, the moment when everything clicked into place, came on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Arthur had been tending his garden for about an hour, deadheading the roses and checking the progress of his tomato seedlings. The sun was warm on his back, and the air was filled with that particular sweetness of earth and growing things. He needed to plant the new tomato seedlings he'd been nursing in his greenhouse. They were delicate, requiring careful handling and precise placement. In the past, this would have been a project requiring strategy, where to position himself how to minimize the kneeling, whether to use a garden stool or tough it out. But this morning, Arthur simply walked over to the prepared bed, knelt down and began to work. It wasn't until he was 3 plants in that he realized what had happened. He was kneeling, not carefully, not with a plan, not with the constant mental calculation of how will I get back up. He was simply kneeling, the way he had for decades before his body began its anxious negotiations. His hands were steady as they cradled the fragile roots. He could feel the cool dampness of the soil through his fingertips, that rich, loamy texture that had always brought him such deep satisfaction. There was no static of hesitation, no background noise of uncertainty. Arthur paused, a seedling suspended between his palms, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete presence in his own body. He wasn't observing his body or managing it or negotiating with it. He was simply being it. The morning sun caught the water droplets on the leaves around him, creating tiny prisms of light. Arthur smiled, not the careful, hopeful smile of someone trying to be positive, but the unconscious smile of someone who had found their way back to themselves. He planted the remaining seedlings with the fluid grace of someone who had remembered how to trust his own strength. When he finally stood brushing the earth from his knees, he realized he wasn't just a man in a garden anymore. He was the garden nourished, balanced, and full of life. Arthur's story isn't really about 5 fruits, though they were the tools that made his transformation possible. It's about a profound shift in perspective that changes everything. Most of us have been taught to see our aging bodies as machines that inevitably break down. We approach our physical challenges like mechanics, identify the problem, apply the fix, hope for the best. But what if that entire framework is wrong? What if your body isn't a machine at all, but an ecosystem? What if those whispers of uncertainty, those moments of hesitation, those subtle changes in your strength and confidence, aren't signs of breakdown, but signals from a system that's asking for better nourishment? This is what Arthur discovered in his garden, and it's what thousands of my patients have discovered in their own lives. When you stop fighting your body and start cultivating it, everything changes. The avocado becomes more than a healthy fat. It becomes your daily act of reducing inflammation, of soothing the irritated soil of your cells. The tart cherry juice isn't just a bedtime drink. It's your nightly ritual of washing away the day's stress and giving your body the deep recovery it craves. The pomegranate juice with lunch becomes your midday commitment to nourishing every cell, every muscle fiber, every corner of your physical being. The prunes become your morning signal that it's safe to grow, safe to build, safe to trust your body's wisdom again. And the apple, that simple, unpeeled apple, becomes your daily protection against the forces that would tell your muscles to stop growing, to stop trying to accept limitation as inevitable. These aren't prescriptions. They're your gardening tool. They're ways to listen and respond to what your body is whispering instead of waiting for it to shout. Arthur didn't just regain his strength. He regained his flow. He regained his trust. He regained the quiet confidence that comes from living in a body that feels nourished and supported rather than battled and endured. And that more than any measure of muscle mass or grip strength is what true vitality looks like after 60. So my invitation to you today isn't to simply copy Arthur's routine, though you certainly could. It's to start your own experiment, to begin your own conversation with your body based on nourishment rather than fear. Pick one. Maybe it's the soothing compost of the avocado, mixed into your morning eggs or spread on whole grain toast. Maybe it's the gentle night rain of the tart cherry juice sipped slowly as you prepare for the deep restorative sleep your body is craving. Perhaps it's the irrigation system of the pomegranate, that rich ruby red juice that will help nourish every corner of your being. Or the slow-release fertilizer of the prunes, embraced not as a chore, but as a daily signal that your body is safe to grow. Maybe it's as simple as eating an apple skin and all each afternoon, knowing that you're actively protecting the strength you're building. Start with one, give it 2 weeks, and don't just measure your strength, measure your flow. Notice the small things. Does the staircase feel less like a challenge and more like a rhythm? Does the lid on the jar twist a little easier? Do you find yourself moving through your day with less negotiation and more confidence? These are the real measures of vitality. Not the dramatic before and after photos, but the quiet return of trust between you and your body. Start your own dialogue. Your body is waiting to tell you what it needs. Here's what I want you to remember as you begin this journey. The goal isn't to turn back the clock. It's to learn how to play the instrument of your body. With more skill, more joy, and more harmony in every season of life. Your body isn't failing you. It's not betraying you. It's not giving up on you. It's simply asking for a different kind of conversation. A conversation based on nourishment rather than neglect, on cultivation rather than combat. Stop fighting your body and start cultivating it. Listen to its whispers with compassion rather than fear. Respond to its needs with the gentle attention you'd give to a garden you truly love. For in that rich, nourished soil of your being lies all the strength you seek. Not the strength of your youth, but something even more precious, the strength of wisdom, of presence, of a life fully lived and deeply felt.